So today I want to give you a synopsis of what has happened the last 2,000 years in our church. When Jesus was alive in human form, obviously the church was not as it is today. We did not have a Christian religion and a Jewish religion. Obviously, we just had the Jewish religion of the Israelites. Jesus came out of that community. He obeyed every commandment as they did. He told others to follow him. He made it clear that he came to fulfill the law and not to abolish it in case there was any confusion in the future. And for some reason, there has been a lot of confusion in the future of the church. It seems like when he died and was resurrected, people wanted to think that he meant, I did not come to abolish the law until I died and was resurrected. Then I've abolished the law, which doesn't make any sense. And so we've got these two very separate religions, these entities that should not be separate. I mean, it's all one thing. It's the Jewish religion. They have a Messiah. The Messiah says, I'll accept all nations, and all nations are supposed to come to the Jewish people, the Israelites. It was never meant to be, oh yeah, I'm the Messiah of all nations, so the Jewish people are going to be over here, and all the rest of the nations are going to be over here as enemies. We were all supposed to be one united front against the common enemy. And of course, he loves to see us divided. So what happened was, after Jesus died and was resurrected, and you have the miracle of the Holy Spirit pouring out on Shavuot at the temple, and then you have Paul's conversion. Obviously, Jesus tells him to spread the gospel message to the Gentiles. Acts kind of leaves on a cliffhanger, and then we get into the letters and we get into Revelation, but we don't really see what happens past that in the Bible. But if you look at the church history, we can get a glimpse of what has happened since then. So we do know that while Jesus was alive in human form, Roman persecution was heavy, and that didn't stop right after he died. It's not like it went away all of a sudden. It continued, and what happened was the Jewish people were still facing Roman persecution, and then anyone who believed in Messiah, who was a Gentile, who wanted to come to the nation of Israel as he intended, obviously was suffering the same persecution, which should have been anticipated, since he warned everyone that anyone who comes in my name will suffer his same fate. What they do to me, they will do to you. It's not like he sugarcoats it. It's not like he hides the truth. But, despite all that, they get to this point where Gentile Christians are being persecuted by the Romans so much that they decide to make themselves separate from the Jewish people. And this, at the time, when you look back, it makes sense. Not all Jewish people came to realize that Jesus was the Messiah. Especially not all Jewish people came to realize that Jesus was the Messiah and is now allowing Gentiles into the nation. There's always been a strict, hard line between Israelites and the Gentiles, and so that's a really hard concept to grasp at first without the power of the Lord doing it himself in your heart. And so what happened was, we have these Gentile Christians who have come to realize this is the Messiah of the world. We are going to live as he lived, as he obeys us. We are going to take up our cross and follow his commands, the commands of his Father. And so they try to go to the synagogue on Shabbat, and they want to live as he lived. So they try to observe Passover, and they want to do all the things that Jesus did. And unfortunately, you have the Jews at the synagogue that don't believe he's the Messiah giving them pushback. Why are you here? You have no reason to be here. You're not allowed to be here. We don't want you here. The Torah that was given to the Israelite people on Mount Sinai, they made a covenant with the Lord, like a legal obligation that they would obey this Torah. And that's a beautiful thing, to have a contract with our one true Father. I mean, of course, the Gentiles are going to be jealous that they don't have that special connection with Father, and so they want in on it. But of course the Jewish people are going to say, this is ours. This is our contract with God, with Father, and, you know, we're not willing to share it. It's not right, but I can see how it makes sense. So the Gentile Christians are having pushback on all sides. First, they're not being accepted into the synagogue from the Jews. Then they're suffering Roman persecution for declaring Jesus as the Messiah. They're in a tough boat. So what they choose to do is, instead of standing firm in their faith, they take the commandment from Leviticus that says, observe my commandments and you shall live by them. And they say, okay, well, if we're going to live by them, then we kind of need to change the commandments, unfortunately, so that we can live, because they're getting persecuted. Again, it's out of fear. It wasn't waiting patiently for the faithfulness of the Lord, but that is what happened. Here we are. So instead of celebrating Shabbat, they said, oh no, you know, we have nothing to do with those Jewish people. You know, we have a totally different day of worship. Look, we're worshiping on Sunday. And instead of honoring Passover and Rosh Hashanah, all of those biblical feasts, they say, what? No, we don't celebrate those. Look, we have Easter and we have Christmas and we have totally different religions. What are you talking about? We have nothing to do with those Jewish people. And so in order to avoid persecution, that was their plan of action. That's how we get such different holidays that aren't in the Bible, never mentioned. That's how we have a different day of worship. That's how we have a lot of differences in our faith. And that's how we have the separation of Jewish and Christian. It's man-made. It's not from God. It's not biblical. It's out of fear of persecution. You know, it's a mistake, obviously. But that is the course that we've taken these past 2,000 years in our Christian faith. From there, they started to canonize the Bible. So they decided which books were going to be in our biblical text. And the Hebrew Bible is a little different from the Christian Bible. Roman Catholic Bible is a little different from, you know, other Christian Bibles. So there's these differences depending on your faith of what they deemed important to be in the Bible. So they didn't make it public at first, the Bible. They had the Bible for the church service, and you go to church and you hear about the Bible, and then you go home and you don't have a personal copy at home. That was up until Martin Luther, like about the 1500s. And then when he posted his theses on the church doors, you know, it started to make a revolution. They started to make, well, the printing press was a huge difference there too. They started to make Bibles more available for the common household, and they started printing mass copies of Bibles. You know, Martin Luther was like, everyone needs a personal copy of their Bible. And so there undergoes this whole revolution, and a lot of changes are made. There, you have this clash because people are starting to catch on that the traditions of the church don't match with the commandments of the Lord in the Bible. And so that is where you see a lot of religious pushback in Europe in that time. That's where you see, you know, people wanting to go to America for religious freedom. You see different religions pop up here and there, like Lutherans and, you know, Baptists. You see all the different denominations pop up based on how they feel is important to worship God as a Gentile according to what they read. Like I said, it is hard because as Gentiles, we don't have that covenant with the Lord to obey all his commands. So while the Jewish people have these strict commands to obey, and their ancestors have pledged to the Lord that they will obey the commands. They are in legal obligation to the Lord to obey every commandment of the Torah, to, perfect as they can. That's their covenant with the Lord. For us, we never had that covenant with our ancestors. We are not under that obligation. In fact, it would be inappropriate to assume that we are under that obligation and make ourselves as the Jewish nation and try to obey every commandment perfectly, because it's not our place. That is something so special to this nation. We don't have that, unfortunately. And so we don't have that special obligation to obey commandment. And so the way that a Gentile obeys the Lord is kind of, so they had the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15, and they tried to clear up some of the differences between how a Gentile would obey the Lord or how a Jewish person would obey the Lord. What they found was that as a Gentile, you can stay a Gentile. You don't have to be circumcised as a proselyte and convert to Judaism. But then, where does that leave you? When the synagogues won't accept you, you're being persecuted. Like I said, I don't agree with it now, but if you're in that time, you're looking back, I get it. I can see why they made those changes in our religion. So, we get to the Americas, we have all the different, sects of Christianity popping up, because people are starting to catch on that the way the church has changed things in the Bible is anti-Semitic, and that's not how we should be. And there's a lot of actual translations that were made in the Bible from the Hebrew texts that they chose to put in there, like slight differences in translation. They chose, in order to prove that they were separate from the Jewish people. There's a few translations that make it sound like Jesus was replacing the Jewish people with the Gentiles. And instead of accepting Gentiles into the Jewish nation, it sounds like he, in fact, is saying, no, Christians are completely separate from Jewish people. We've had enough with the Jewish people. We tried with them, and now we've given up. When in fact, that never happens in the Bible. If you read through the whole thing, there's so much emphasis on the law and keeping the law and obeying the Lord, and then there's so little difference in the New Testament. It's all the same thing. It's just his stories of how he's trying to get the Gentile nations to tell them to obey the law. And then afterwards, it's just kind of like we just didn't know how as Gentiles. And that's unfortunate. And so I think now what you see in our modern American theology is that we're starting to catch on to the mistakes that we've made as the Christian religion. It really came about, unfortunately, after Holocaust. Holocaust was a huge event in history where I think they started opening their eyes. And, especially the Roman Catholics in the 60s, after that whole ordeal, they publicly denounced the accusation that the Jews killed Jesus, which is huge, but should have never been an accusation in the first place. It's just little nuances like that. I think they didn't realize the nuances like that. I don't think they realized the problems that would come from making those little changes. And unfortunately, the consequences were dire. Holocaust was a huge wake-up call. And thankfully in the 60s, they made that announcement that they denounced the accusation of the Jews killing Jesus. And from there, you have this new Messianic Judaism sect popping up. And it's really taking a stronghold. It's basically Judaism, practicing the culture of Judaism with realizing that Jesus is the Messiah, which is all Jesus intended to do in the first place. He never meant to abolish Torah. He is the Word made flesh. Jesus is in fact the Torah. So how could he come to abolish himself? That would make no sense. That did not happen. He wants everyone to obey Torah because that is how we learn how to love God and love one another as God tells us to do. As Jesus told us to do too. It's our guideline. But unfortunately, there's been so much miscommunication, misunderstanding, misteachings, and it's gotten us to this place where we're so divided, and we're so confused of how we got divided, and we're so confused of why we're divided, and we just need to come together. We need to realize our mistakes. We need to repent of our mistakes, and we need to come back to a united force, because there is a real enemy out there, not each other. He's out there and he's working hard. And, there's the time is coming where Jesus is going to come back and rule over his kingdom. And the laws are not going to change. He's still going to require the same laws in his kingdom. So whether we decide to practice now, make an alliance with the nation of Israel, as they did in the book of Joshua, so that they were saved. I mean, the choice needs to be made now. We are in battle formation, and things are happening, and we need to make an alliance with Israel now, so that we can start observing the laws of the Lord, so that we can be ready. We need to know what's coming and how to identify the Lord from the enemy. We have so many Christians now who are worshiping trees, which is against Torah. We have so many Christians now who are looking to the stars, which is against Torah. We have so many Christians now who don't know Torah, which is a shame, because Jesus is the Word made flesh. So if you don't know Torah, then you don't know Jesus. And if you've never seen Jesus' face, then you're truly not saved. And it goes into this whole mess of what is Christianity today. Is Christianity just pronouncing the faith in Jesus for a bumper sticker? Is it for social status? I mean, he said all this would happen, so I won't be surprised, but I want to know what side you're on. Are you on the side of professing the name of Yeshua for social status? Are you posting for likes and comments? Or is your heart really aligned to the Jesus of Nazareth, who was a Jewish man, who is Torah made flesh, who lives inside of you, who does not want you to be separate from his Jewish people or the Torah, which is himself? Like I said, obviously, observing Torah is going to be different for a Gentile. We are not going to observe Shabbat in every detail. We are going to, instead of observing it, we would respect it. We would, honor it. Of course, a day of rest, you may not do any chores or cooking that day. You can put on a crock pot the day before. You can make some small changes in order to honor it, but you don't have to go to the extent to observing it in every fine detail as the Jewish nation does, because that would be inappropriate. We are not Jewish. The same for every holiday. I mean, teach your children about it. Teach your children about why we celebrate it. They all point to Jesus, every single one. And if you don't see the correlation of Jesus, you at least know they point to God. Why would we not be making this excuse to honor God and teaching our children of why he tells us to celebrate these holidays? I know you can make the argument that with these other holidays that man created, we do the same thing. We honor God. But why choose to do it through man-created holidays and not through his own holidays that he commands us to follow? In my opinion, in my experience, it's much more fruitful and a much sweeter relationship with the Lord when you obey his commandments and you worship and honor him the way he wants us to and tells us to, instead of doing it your own way or the traditions of men. You know, we need to be holding to the commandments, not the traditions of men. And so I just hope that if this doesn't change your mind, at least it'll start sparking some interest in Torah and have you realize that it's not as far away from us as you think. It's not, you know, this old history book that doesn't matter anymore. It matters. It's alive. It'll always matter. You know, it's the Word of God. It'll be eternal. So I hope that this ignites your heart for a love for Torah. If not a love, hopefully maybe just an interest. Thank you.